April 9, 1952. Skies above Mig Alley, North Korea. The pencil moved deliberately across the mission report as Captain Ralph Hoot Gibson documented what would later be recognized as a paradigm shift in aerial combat doctrine. Words that contradicted everything taught at fighter school since the dawn of jet warfare. Through frost-rimmed eyes, he had watched his wingman execute a maneuver that violated every instinct hammered into pilots since their first flights. Deliberately rolling inverted when attacked from behind. The Soviets would soon learn to fear American pilots who flew upside down. We have discovered something they cannot comprehend. Through the scratched canopy at 35,000 FT, he had observed as Lieutenant James Jabara, facing certain death from a MiG-15 locked firmly on his tail, had rolled his F-86 Sabre completely inverted and pulled back on the stick, diving up toward the earth while negative G-forces crushed his body against his harness straps. The pursuing MiG pilot, unprepared for such a radical maneuver, had overshot dramatically, transforming from predator to prey in less than 4 seconds. The mathematics of aerial superiority were being rewritten not in climbing performance or thrust-to-weight ratios, but in the terrifying physics of deliberate negative G maneuvering that Soviet pilots, trained never to subject themselves to such physiologically punishing forces, could not match. Gibson destroyed 3 MiG-15s that week using these unorthodox tactics, earning the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions protecting the B-29 bomber formations. The transformation had begun on November 8, 1951, when the 4th Fighter Interceptor Wing flew a sweep mission over the Yalu River. The American pilots were tense and uncertain. They had trained extensively in the F-86 Sabre, but many remained skeptical about engaging the nimble MiG-15s in turning combat. At 11,700 pounds empty and 16,200 pounds fully loaded, the F-86 was decidedly heavier than the Soviet fighter at 8,115 pounds empty and 12,570 pounds combat loaded. This weight difference gave the MiG-15 superior climb rates above 30,000 feet. Critics called the F-86 beautiful but outmatched. Detractors pointed to the MiG-15's 11,000 feet per minute initial climb rate that dwarfed the Sabre's 7,470 feet per minute. Soviet tacticians openly claimed their aircraft's superiority, confident their pilots could dominate the skies above North Korea. Among the doubters was Lieutenant Colonel Glenn T. Eagleston, an experienced combat pilot with 18.5 victories from World War II, who initially questioned whether American jets could prevail against the Soviet-designed fighters. His personal records, documented in after-action reports and later in interviews with Air Force historians, would chronicle one of the most unexpected tactical revolutions in combat aviation history. The journey from skepticism to mastery began at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, where test pilot Chuck Yeager had inadvertently discovered something while pushing the F-86 to its structural limits. Yeager had famously remarked after an extreme test flight, "The aircraft doesn't know it's upside down, only the pilot does." This seemingly obvious observation contained the seed of tactical innovation that would transform jet combat. The F-86 Sabre's flight characteristics when inverted were remarkably stable. More importantly, its hydraulic control systems allowed pilots to maintain precise control even while flying upside down for extended periods. The first pilot to deliberately employ this characteristic in combat was Captain James Hagerstrom on December 6, 1951. When trapped by a MiG-15 with superior position, Hagerstrom had rolled inverted and pulled, subjecting himself to negative 4G forces. The pursuing MiG pilot, facing the sudden unexpected maneuver, had continued straight ahead, presenting Hagerstrom with a perfect deflection shot. The resulting victory validated what would soon become standard tactical doctrine throughout the theatre. The early months of the Korean Air War brought frustration and concern to American pilots. Between November 1950 and March 1951, MiG-15s demonstrated alarming superiority in high-altitude engagements against F-80 Shooting Stars and F-84 Thunderjets. The arrival of F-86 Sabres in December 1950 helped balance the equation, but experienced pilots quickly recognized fundamental challenges in the air-to-air arena that conventional tactics couldn't overcome. Major James Jabara, who would eventually become the first American jet ace, documented his concerns in a January 1951 tactical assessment. The MiG-15 can outclimb us by nearly 3,500 feet per minute above 30,000 feet. When they spot our formations, they simply climb another 5,000 feet, then dive through us with superior energy. Standard doctrine offers no effective counter. The MiG-15's Klimov VK-1 engine produced 5,150 pounds of thrust, giving it a thrust-to-weight ratio of 0.42 at combat weight. Combined with its lighter airframe and highly swept wings, this created a fighter that could operate effectively up to 50,000 feet, altitudes where F-86A models struggled to maintain control effectiveness. The Sabre, however, possessed its own advantages. The F-86A's hydraulic flight control system remained fully effective throughout its flight envelope, while MiG-15 pilots reported stiffening controls at high speeds. The North American aviation engineers had designed the F-86 with exceptional roll rate capabilities, up to 100 degrees per second, nearly double the MiG's 57 degrees per second maximum roll rate. This characteristic initially seemed useful primarily for defensive maneuvers, until test pilots began exploring its application in negative G flight regimes. In September 1951, Major John Godfrey at Nellis Air Force Base conducted a series of experiments specifically examining the Sabre's inverted flight characteristics. His classified report, declassified in 1974, contained the theoretical foundation for what would become revolutionary combat tactics. The F-86 exhibits remarkable control authority during sustained inverted flight at speeds between 350 and 550 knots indicated airspeed. The hydraulic boost system maintains effectiveness under negative 3G loads for periods exceeding 15 seconds, sufficient time for combat maneuvering. The physiological challenges, however, were severe. Blood rushed to pilots' heads during inverted maneuvers, creating pressure behind the eyes and intense discomfort. Sinuses filled, vision narrowed, and spatial orientation became difficult to maintain. Standard oxygen masks leaked during negative G maneuvers, and visibility through the canopy was compromised when flying upside down. Training would need to address these human factors before the aerodynamic advantages could be exploited. Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, veteran of World War II, with 28 victories, who now commanded the 51st Fighter Interceptor Wing in Korea, initially rejected the concept. Dogfighting is about energy management and turning inside your opponent, he argued in October 1951. Deliberate negative G maneuvering wastes energy and creates vulnerability. Gabreski's perspective represented conventional wisdom. Every fighter pilot since World War I had been taught to avoid negative G flight whenever possible. Captain Ralph Gibson challenged this orthodoxy. In a contentious wing tactics meeting on October 24, 1951, Gibson presented gun camera footage showing a MiG-15 overshooting after he had executed an emergency inverted dive. The Soviet pilot had no effective counter, Gibson argued. Their training explicitly prohibits sustained negative G maneuvers. We should exploit this tactical asymmetry deliberately. The debate intensified among senior pilots until Colonel Willard Bill Milliken, commander of the 4th Fighter Interceptor Wing, made a critical decision in early November. We'll test Gibson's theory in actual combat. Starting tomorrow, each squadron will designate 2 experienced pilots to attempt the inverted maneuver when tactical conditions permit. We'll evaluate results after 1 week of operations. This decision, to deliberately fly upside down during combat, would prove the turning point in the aerial campaign over MiG Alley, November 8, 1951. Combat Air Patrol mission along the Yalu River. Lieutenant Frederick Boots Blesse banked his F-86 Sabre sharply as he led the first deliberate test of inverted combat maneuvers. The morning briefing had been tense, with skeptical voices questioning whether deliberately flying upside down under combat conditions was tactical innovation or simply reckless endangerment. Blesse had volunteered immediately. "If it works," he told his flight, "we gain an advantage the Soviets won't expect. If it fails, well, I've always wondered what Manchuria looks like this time of year." At 38,000 feet, the four-ship formation of Sabres patrolled the border region where MiG-15s routinely crossed to attack UN bomber formations. The radio crackled with the controller's warning. "Heads up, MiGs inbound from the north, Angels 42. 12 Soviet fighters were dropping from altitude, their silver fuselages glinting in the morning sun as they positioned for a high-side attack. Blesse keyed his microphone. "Remember the plan. Let them commit to the attack, then execute the inverted roll on my mark." The MiGs split into elements of two, diving toward the American formation with superior energy. The lead MiG fired a burst from its 23mm cannons at extreme range, the rounds passing harmlessly behind Blesse's aircraft. "Now!" Blesse commanded. 4 F-86 simultaneously rolled 180 degrees to inverted flight. The pilots pulled back on their control sticks, counterintuitively causing their aircraft to dive toward the ground while experiencing negative G-forces. The closing MiG pilots, confronted with targets suddenly changing direction in an impossible manner, overshot dramatically. Within seconds, the tactical situation had completely reversed. Blesse rolled upright, pulled hard, and found himself perfectly positioned on the tail of a MiG-15. A 3-second burst from his 650 caliber machine guns sent the Soviet fighter spinning toward the earth, trailing smoke. The engagement lasted less than 90 seconds from initial contact to confirmed kill. 3 additional MiGs fell to American guns during this first test of inverted tactics. More importantly, all 8 F-86 returned safely to base. The post-mission debrief was electric with excitement. Colonel John Meyer, who had observed the engagement from a distance, immediately ordered the tactics incorporated into all squadron operations. "What we witnessed today changes everything," he noted in the official combat report. The Soviets had no effective counter. Their pilots appeared completely disoriented by our inverted maneuvers. Technical refinements followed quickly. Analysis of gun camera footage revealed optimal roll rates of 75 to 85 degrees per second, provided the perfect balance between pilot disorientation and tactical surprise. The most effective inverted maneuvers maintained negative 2 to 3 G for 3 to 5 seconds, long enough to force an overshoot, but not so long that pilots suffered significant vision impairment. Major William Wisner, who scored 2 victories on November 9th using the new tactics, described the experience vividly. "When you roll inverted and pull, your body feels like it's being ripped out of the seat. Blood pounds in your head. Your cheeks feel like they weigh 20 pounds each. But seeing that MiG suddenly out front, perfectly centered in your gun sight, makes the discomfort worthwhile." Not all attempts succeeded. On November 15th, Captain Robert Moore attempted an inverted maneuver at excessive speed, experiencing severe negative G-forces that caused momentary disorientation. The pursuing MiG pilot capitalized on Moore's vulnerability, damaging his aircraft before wingmen drove off the attacker. Moore managed to limp back to base, his experience providing valuable lessons on the maneuver's limitations. By December 1951, inverted combat tactics had become standard procedure throughout the theater. The statistical results were undeniable. In engagements where pilots successfully executed the inverted maneuver, kill ratios exceeded 8.1. Overall, F-86 success rates against MiG-15s climbed steadily as more pilots mastered the technique, reaching 4.1 by year's end. Soviet pilots, constrained by rigid tactical doctrine that prohibited negative G maneuvers, struggled to develop effective countermeasures. January 1952 brought the full technical maturation of inverted combat maneuvering, transforming it from experimental tactic to refined doctrine. The 4th Fighter Interceptor Wing's Technical Evaluation Unit, established specifically to analyze and codify the new approach, completed comprehensive flight testing that revealed the precise aerodynamic principles making inverted flight so devastatingly effective against Soviet opponents. Captain James Hagerstrom, who headed the unit, documented the findings in a classified tactical bulletin distributed throughout the theatre on January 15th. The fundamental advantage derives from exploiting gravity rather than fighting it. When a pursuing aircraft maintains a position behind a target, both aircraft typically maneuver in the horizontal plane or execute positive G vertical maneuvers. By abruptly transitioning to negative G flight, the pursued aircraft creates an instantaneous vector separation that conventional pursuit curves cannot resolve. The technical perfection of the maneuver depended on precise execution. The ideal entry occurred at 450-500 knots indicated airspeed. The pilot would execute a snap roll at 75 to 85 degrees per second, transitioning from upright to inverted flight in approximately 1.2 seconds. Once inverted, the pilot would pull the stick back smoothly, applying 2.5 to 3.0 negative G forces. The F-86's hydraulic control system maintained full effectiveness even under these conditions, allowing precise flight path control while subjecting the airframe to stresses well within its negative 3.5 G structural limit. This negative G pushover created an instantaneous flight path change that violated all standard fighter pursuit curves. The MiG pilot, maintaining traditional positive G tracking, would follow a larger radius turn and inevitably overshoot. The critical moment came as the F-86 pilot rolled upright after 3 to 5 seconds of inverted flight, finding himself perfectly positioned for a high deflection shot at the now vulnerable MiG. Mastering these maneuvers required overcoming severe physiological challenges. Blood rushing to the head under negative G forces created intense pressure behind the eyes, sinus pain, and partial vision impairment. The standard G-suit offered no protection against negative forces, as it was designed solely to prevent blood pooling in the lower extremities during positive G maneuvers. Pilots developed compensatory techniques through specialized training at the 4th Wing's Upside Down School, established in February 1952. Major John Glenn, who would later achieve fame as an astronaut, described the physical experience. "It feels like your face is going to explode. Your cheeks puff out, sinuses fill instantly, and vision narrows to about 50% of normal. We learn to tense neck muscles, maintain rapid, shallow breathing, and limit exposure to 5 to 6 seconds maximum. Beyond that, disorientation becomes unmanageable." Equipment modifications supported the new tactics. The standard MA2 oxygen mask was modified with additional retention straps to prevent leakage during negative G maneuvers. Harness systems received supplemental shoulder restraints to keep pilots firmly secured when hanging against their straps. Instrument panels were modified with redundant orientation indicators visible from inverted positions. Cockpit stowage compartments received additional latching mechanisms to prevent objects becoming dangerous projectiles during inverted flight. By March 1952, every F-86 pilot received 2 hours of specialized inverted flight training before deploying to Korea. The curriculum included progressive exposure to extended negative G maneuvers, beginning with 2-second inversions and building to sustained 8-second maneuvers. Pilots practiced rapid transitions between positive and negative G states to develop physiological adaptation. Centrifuge training at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base subjected pilots to alternating positive and negative G forces, conditioning their bodies to handle the extreme transitions experienced in combat. The complete tactical doctrine incorporated the inverted maneuver within a broader framework of energy management principles. Pilots were taught to maintain energy advantage whenever possible, using high-speed inverted reversals only when caught in disadvantageous positions. The F-86's superior roll rate became its primary defensive weapon, allowing pilots to instantly reverse the tactical situation when under attack. Colonel Harrison Ting, commanding the 4th Wing during this period, summarized the revolution in a March 1952 assessment. "We've transformed our greatest vulnerability into our greatest strength. When the enemy believes they have us cornered, we execute the one maneuver their tactical doctrine prohibits. The psychological impact is as significant as the tactical advantage. Soviet pilots now hesitate before pressing attacks, knowing what might await them." By April 1952, statistical analysis revealed the dramatic impact of inverted tactics on combat outcomes. The 4th Fighter Interceptor Wing compiled engagement reports from November 1951 through March 1952, documenting 103 aerial victories against MiG-15s while losing only 14 F-86 to enemy fire, a kill ratio of 7.36.1. More significantly, in the 58 engagements where pilots successfully executed the inverted maneuver as their primary defensive tactic, 52 resulted in Soviet aircraft destroyed with 0 American losses. The Battle of Honchori on April 12, 1952, provided the most dramatic demonstration of inverted tactics at scale. 16 F-86 from the 335th Fighter Interceptor Squadron encountered approximately 48 MiG-15s attempting to intercept B-29 bombers. Colonel Francis Gabreski, leading the formation, immediately directed his pilots to maintain altitude advantage at 42,000 feet. When the MiGs climbed to engage, the entire American formation executed coordinated inverted maneuvers. The resulting combat lasted 22 minutes and spread across 80 miles of airspace. Soviet pilots, confronted with tactics their training explicitly prohibited, found themselves repeatedly overshooting their targets and becoming vulnerable. The 335th claimed 10 MiG-15s destroyed and 4 damaged without losses, the highest single-mission kill ratio recorded to that date. Soviet tactical responses evolved rapidly. By May 1952, intercepted radio communications revealed new directives. MiG formations were instructed to break off pursuit immediately if American pilots rolled inverted. Captured pilot Senior Lieutenant Viktor Belenko later confirmed this directive in post-defection interviews. "We were ordered never to follow when F-86s rolled upside down. Our instructors warned us this was an American trap. Instead, we were to disengage, gain separation, and re-establish attack position from a different angle." This defensive response played directly into American strategic objectives by preventing Soviet pilots from pressing home attacks against bomber formations. The psychological impact extended beyond tactical considerations. Lieutenant Pavel Milaushkin, shot down and captured on May 17, 1952, described the effect during interrogation. "The inverted maneuver created terror among our pilots. We believed American aircraft had special modifications, allowing inverted flight that our MiGs lacked." Many pilots refused aggressive engagement altogether. The broader strategic implications became clear by summer 1952. Air superiority over MiG Alley was effectively established. B-29 bomber loss rates decreased 68% compared to pre-inverted tactics periods. The 4th and 51st Fighter Interceptor Wings maintained persistent combat air patrols with increasing confidence, while Soviet formations operated with growing caution and decreasing effectiveness. The Korean War ended with the armistice of July 27, 1953, but the legacy of inverted flight tactics had only begun. Final statistical analysis confirmed F-86 Sabres had achieved 792 aerial victories against 78 losses to enemy fighters, a kill ratio of 10.15.1, the highest in jet combat history. More significantly, This success came against an aircraft with superior technical specifications in several critical performance categories. The tactical innovation had definitively overcome technical disadvantages. Colonel Harrison Thing's post-war tactical assessment became required reading at the newly established Air Force Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base. The inverted maneuver fundamentally changed our approach to energy management, Thing wrote. We learned that fighting in 3 dimensions requires abandoning preconceptions about up and down. The horizon is merely a reference, not a constraint. This perspective directly influenced fighter design philosophy throughout the 1950s and 1960s. The Century Series fighters, particularly the F-100 Super Sabre and F-105 Thunder Chief, featured control systems specifically engineered to maintain effectiveness under negative G conditions. The F-4 Phantom II, which would become America's primary fighter during the Vietnam War, incorporated enhanced negative G handling characteristics and structural strength for sustained inverted maneuvering. The Vietnam conflict brought further refinement. Major Richard Steve Ritchie, who achieved ace status flying F-4 Phantoms in 1972, employed modified inverted tactics against North Vietnamese MiG-21s. We adapted the Korean War technique for supersonic combat, Ritchie explained in a 1973 interview. The physics remained identical, but execution speeds doubled. When a MiG-21 locked on our tail, we'd roll inverted at Mach 1.2, pull negative 3G, and watch them sail helplessly past. By 1975, inverted maneuvers had become standard in fighter pilot training worldwide. The US Navy's Top Gun program incorporated the technique into its core curriculum. NATO allies integrated similar training, as did, ironically, Soviet bloc air forces. The tactical innovation had come full circle, with even its original victims now embracing the approach. Modern fly-by-wire control systems, in 4th and 5th generation fighters, have further perfected these capabilities. Aircraft like the F-16 Fighting Falcon and F-22 Raptor maintain precise control authority throughout their flight envelopes, including during extended negative G maneuvers. The original limitations that made inverted flight so challenging for Korean war pilots have been largely eliminated through technology. Captain Ralph Gibson, who had first championed the unorthodox approach in 1951, reflected on its legacy during a 1997 interview at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. We discovered something fundamental about aerial combat. The pilot who thinks differently, who challenges assumptions about what can't be done, gains an advantage no technology can match. The MiGs had better climb rates, better ceiling, better acceleration. But we had pilots willing to fly upside down when conventional wisdom said it was impossible. The transformation of dogfighting through deliberate inverted flight stands as one of aviation's most profound tactical innovations, a counterintuitive approach that proved how challenging conventional wisdom can sometimes provide the most decisive advantage in aerial warfare.